If you can change your vote when you change your mind, that is what democracy is all about. Now polling.ca.
Perpetual democracy doesn't mean that you have to vote every day. It just means that you have the right and the ability to vote anytime you want. And that is what perpetual democracy is all about.
Part of our inspiration, I think, was delivered last year in Venezuela. A few of us attended the World Social Forum and heard Hugo Chavez speak at the World Social Forum. He gave a lengthy address to about 15,000 delegates attending the World Social Forum and Venezuelans, and he made a very impassioned plea to make the 21st century a century of struggle for socialism. He made a convincing case that the capitalist economic system and the imperialist world order is leading the world on a path of social decay and of destruction, war, environmental degradation, violation of national rights and of sovereignty of oppressed peoples, and attacks on the basic living conditions and living standards of peoples around the world. So his call for a socialism of the 21st century is being echoed throughout Latin America today. It's been taken up by the new leadership team of the Bolivian people, as symbolized by President Evo Morales. And of course, this is a call and appeal that Cuba and the Cuban Revolution has been central in putting forward for the last 45 years. So there is a very important message and appeal that's coming out of the struggles of Latin America, which is part of the inspiration for us to hold this conference and in fact to take a look at what's taking place in Venezuela today and its impact throughout the rest of the continent, but also to look at the political conditions that we face here in this country. John Riddell is going to speak first. He's a member of the Venezuela We Are With You coalition in Toronto. He's a co-editor along with myself of the Socialist Voice newsletter. He's written quite a bit actually on Venezuela. You'll find in several of the latest editions of the Socialist Voice newsletter a couple of very perceptive articles that John has written on the political situation today in Venezuela. So John's going to talk for 20 or 25 minutes on the situation today in Venezuela and the relevance for us here in Canada of that.
Could you tell me every 5 minutes? Sure. And I think a place to start would be with the fact that we are 1 month shy of the 5th anniversary of the great military coup that attempted to overthrow the government led by Hugo Chavez 5 years ago. That is on April 2002. And what happened is the generals gave the order, the tanks moved, the government buildings was occupied, Chavez was hustled away under arrest and in great danger of being executed, and the new government was installed, the Constitution was suspended, the National Assembly was dissolved, the United States was telephoned to immediately pronounce that this was good, was a realization of democracy at last, that this had happened, and then something unexpected happened. The Venezuelan people, in their masses, in their millions, came out on the streets, converged on the government house, swept with them decisive sectors of the army, and within 2 days the military coup was overthrown. And when that happened, I'm sure a lot of us scratched our heads and thought, when was the last time that happened? That the U.S. and their military allies in a Latin American country carried out a coup against a democratically elected government, which they'd done so often, and it didn't stick. It was quickly overthrown by the action of the people. It was something it was the beginning of a revolution. Because a revolution is when the masses of the working people forcefully enter into the political situation and put their stamp on events and determine the course of events. From the point of view of Washington, from the point of view of the oligarchy in Venezuela, this is a fundamental breach of democracy. It's a breach of their God-given right as the privileged, the rich, the educated of the country to determine its future course. And from our point of view, it was the affirmation of democracy that the people of Venezuela had a right to control their government and to determine its course. Why did this happen? The fact that Hugo Chavez was elected at the head of a reform government in Venezuela did not in itself mean the end of stability, because many reform governments, like in British Columbia with the NDP, have been tamed and brought under control. But this government, led by Chavez, did something quite unexpected and quite unprecedented. That is, they implemented their program. And when the powers that be, the high and the mighty, said, well, look, I'm sorry, you can't do this, you don't have our permission to do this, the government said, we don't care if we have your permission, we have the mandate of the electorate, and we are going to implement it. And they went ahead and implemented it. And that's what set them on a collision course with the Venezuelan oligarchy and with Wall Street in Washington. And after the coup was defeated, that just continued with one confrontation after another, as the right wing made one attempt after another to overthrow the government, each one weaker than the one before. And finally, in the elections that just took place in December, the Bolivarian forces, the Bolivarian movement that is led by Hugo Chavez, had 63% of the vote, the highest yet in about 11 elections they've been through in the last years. And they had a mandate, not just a mandate for their program of reform, but a mandate to advance Venezuela towards socialism. And that was something new, too. We all heard that socialism was dead, but the Venezuelan workers and farmers didn't get the message. And they are now proclaiming that socialism is our future, the future of this century, and it's now being discussed not just by small groups like ours, but by tens of millions in Latin America and elsewhere in the world. Now, what this means for socialists, we know as socialists that socialism can only be achieved when the mass of the working population take their fate in hands and shape the future of their country. And that's what's known as a revolution. And that's why when a revolution starts and gets underway in Venezuela, we focus on that. We put that in the center of our politics to try to understand it, to try to defend it, and to try to learn from it with regard to our own tasks here in Canada and our own future course. Now, what was the character of this revolution in Venezuela? It's kind of shifted as it's gone along. But one way of describing it was that in its inception, it was a movement against what's often called neoliberalism. I think another word for neoliberalism is the great offensive of big business, of the imperialist governments that got going in the 1980s and 1990s, designed to drive back the rights of working people everywhere in the world, and particularly in the third world, in the oppressed countries. We've lived this. We've lived the trashing of health care, the driving down of educational standards, the pressing the unions against the wall, and all the rest right here in British Columbia and elsewhere. But in Latin America, it was much more serious. It was not just a matter of the unions and working people losing ground, but the whole national economies being pillaged and being drained of resources, of the national patrimony, the mines, the electricity companies, the telephone companies, and so on, being given away for a song to capitalist interests from North America. Losses that are very hard to make good, that smashed the strength of the national economies there. That it was neoliberalism in Latin America was not merely a question of pressing against workers and unionists, but also of increasing greatly the oppression and devastating these countries. And the movement in Venezuela grew up as revolt against that, in revolt against the measures the government was taking to enrich the multinationals, to enrich the local oligarchy at the cost of working people in that country, their jobs and their livelihoods. That's how it began. Now that is seen all across Latin America. The unique thing about Venezuela that makes it different, say, from Argentina or Bolivia, where there have been similar movements, is that in Venezuela they managed to achieve a very close and fruitful alliance of a leadership which managed to capture a section of the government, the presidency and the executive, and the mass movement. And again we have seen the interplay, a very fruitful interplay between the masses and the leadership, sometimes one pulling the other along, sometimes the other pushing the one forward. And that has been what this dynamic in which the masses have been closely involved has been made the whole history of the last years possible. It was very decisive that the government, in instituting its reform measures, did not simply try to work through the corrupt ministries inherited from the old regime, but built new institutions to carry out the new programs. And so, for example, the great Venezuelan public health initiative called Barrio Adentro is not just part of the Ministry of Health. It's something new, a separate institution which has been built and administered at the base level by communities across the country. Similar initiatives were taken in the fields of education, of literacy. A great initiative was made to ally with the indigenous people of Venezuela and to guarantee their indigenous rights, including self-determination. This was written right into the Constitution that was adopted in the first period of the Hugo Chavez government. And there were measures to launch cooperatives, to enable working people to form cooperatives and get government support, and also to bring the multinationals under control, and now increasingly to bring them under government ownership. And all these ways try to undo the losses and devastation of the last 20 years and get working people back on their feet again. The key thing was that for Venezuela, under the Hugo Chavez leadership, development, economic development, had to serve the development of working people, and that was placed in the center.